Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. And I'm Katie Halper, wearing sunglasses because I have really bad eye allergies.
Well, yay for eye allergies because it looks cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, yeah, shout out to eye allergies
for bringing you today's cool look.
Yeah.
And it is someone. Happy birthday to Meatwad, whose birthday it was on July 1st. This is the last opportunity for people to celebrate my birthday month by giving the show a like.
Well, don't lose your chance, everybody. Take full advantage. And also just give a like for Kitty's sunglasses, too. That's another bonus reason to give a like.
Yep.
For the show.
And I'll be doing a call-in afterwards. A little short call-in afterwards, yeah.
Okay, and there'll be a link to that in the
show notes. Yeah, by the end of the show, there'll be a link to it.
Okay.
In the show notes. But we got a great show for you today. Now, Aaron, do you want to tell them or should I tell them the bad news for today?
Oh, the bad news.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Maybe, yeah.
All right. Well, we're already weaning off of Chuck Todd because he's not going to be with us starting at the end of the summer. But he was actually, maybe they did this on purpose, but Meet the Press was preempted this weekend. I believe for Wimbledon.
For a golf tournament.
Oh, something else I don't care about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
A golf tournament.
Great look though, Chuck. There.
Right, yeah. Where'd you get that, Wilson?
Look at that. Yeah. That's
impressive. It's my desktop background. I always have it.
Oh, nice.
Wow, Wilson.
Like a ginger almost.
Yeah. You know, one reason my conspiracy theory for why Chuck Todd was off this week was because this week was pretty embarrassing, or was potentially embarrassing for the Bidens. There was that whistleblower hearing with these two IRS agents who alleged that Hunter Biden got favorable treatment. And then there was the release of this FBI document in which an FBI source claimed to have information about the Bidens getting bribed by a gas company executive in Ukraine to make their problems go away, which Hunter Biden and Joe Biden did help do, in the sense that Joe Biden fired the prosecutor who was investigating this gas company, Burisma, where Hunter Biden happened to get a lucrative board seat after the U.S.-backed coup of 2014. Right. So Chuck Todd happened to be off at a very
he needs to process
moment. Yeah.
Right. Maybe he needs to process it before he responded to it.
Or maybe just the people needed to see golf because everyone loves watching golf on.
Oh, I see. Right. Like bread and circuses. Bread and circus. Yeah.
Well, luckily we have so much more content to fill the void. Let's start with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He spoke to Fareed Zakaria of CNN about the proxy war in Ukraine.
Good to have you on.
Great to be with you, Fareed.
Tell us what you can sense of what is going on in the counteroffensive that Ukraine is attempting with Russia. So far, the reports seem to be it is very slow and very tough going.
Well, first, Fareed, put this in perspective. In terms of what Russia sought to achieve, what Putin sought to achieve, they've already failed. They've already lost. The objective was to erase Ukraine from the map, to eliminate its independence, its sovereignty, to subsume it into Russia. That failed a long time ago. Now,
that's just a straight up lie. He knows that's not true. He knows that. Russia, everyone knows now, went in with a relatively small force that was not nearly enough to occupy all of Ukraine. That would be a pretty much impossible task. Ukraine's a huge country. Russia, unlike the U.S. in Baghdad, didn't bomb Kiev to knock out infrastructure and the government. All of that was left intact. And that's why months later, like in September of 2022, that's when the New York Times reported, for people who remember this, that Western officials were, quote, baffled that Russia wasn't going after Ukraine's basic infrastructure, as they would do if they went into a foreign country to take it over. So Blinken is projecting Russia's goal was not to take over Ukraine. It was to force Ukraine to go to the negotiating table to accept the terms that it wouldn't implement before the war, namely the Minsk Accords, and also to get the U.S., because they were using Ukraine as a NATO proxy, to stop using Ukraine as a NATO proxy and to agree to make Ukraine neutral, which we just saw the U.S. is still refusing to change its position on, because they still won't even give Ukraine NATO membership.
Right.
They just want to use the future promise of NATO membership to continue using Ukraine to fight Russia without having the obligation to defend Ukraine itself. So anyway, in short, Blinken is completely falsifying Russia's goals. Of course he is at this point.
Right. So I'm sure he's going to get major pushback from Fareed, right?
Ukraine is in a battle to get back more of the land that Russia seized from it. It's already taken back about 50% of what was initially seized. Now they're in a very hard fight to take back more. These are still.
You know, I haven't fact checked that one. I don't think that's true. Russia still controls 20% of the country. Did they occupy 40% of the country before? I don't think so. But anyway, par for the course with Tony Blinken.
And also, you know what's really annoying? Another annoying thing about this is that it forces other people to basically say, like, because of the way that they misrepresent what Putin said and does, then we sound like Putin apologists, because we have to actually say, actually, he's not being this genocidal monster, or not being this, bloodthirsty monster killing everything in sight, just because that's the facts. And then because they're distorting it so much, then we sound like Putin apologists.
Well, to a neocon, sure, but anybody who relays basic facts will be called a Putin apologist. But I don't think to anyone fair-minded, I don't think people will sound that way if they're just actually reporting facts that otherwise get lied about on CNN. But hey, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
Okay.
Offensive. It is tough. The Russians have put in place strong defenses, but I'm convinced that with the equipment and support they've received now from more than 50 countries, with the training that their forces have gotten, and many of the forces who've gotten that training have not yet been put fully into this fight, and maybe more than anything else, with the fact that, unlike the Russians, the Ukrainians are fighting for their land, for their future, for their country, for their freedom. I think that is the decisive element, and that's going to play out. But it will not play out over the next week or two. We're still looking, I think, at several months.
So if you look at what the Ukrainians are up against.
Okay, well, that's some news right there. Blinken saying that we're looking at several months more of fighting. And meanwhile, if you read all the establishment newspapers this week, Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, for a couple of days there was a lull. There wasn't any Ukraine news really, or at least it was kind of buried. But now you have all these stories saying how basically things are not going well at all. And in fact, let me just show you one from the Wall Street Journal. This really captures it all. So this was the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago, and they said this. They said when Ukraine launched its big counteroffensive this spring, Western military officials knew Kyiv didn't have all the training or weapons that it needed to dislodge Russian forces. But they hoped Ukrainian courage and resourcefulness would carry the day. They haven't. So, oops, yeah, when we pushed them into a counteroffensive, we knew we hadn't given them the equipment they needed to succeed, but we hoped that their courage and resourcefulness would carry the day.
Right.
So how could that go wrong? And it's so easy to hope that someone else's courage will win out when, of course, they're the ones who have to bear the brunt of the sacrifice. They're the ones who actually have to fight. And we're sitting in DC and London hoping that their courage will win out. It's pretty cowardly to count on someone else's courage while you're sitting thousands of miles away. So
not volunteering yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was the Wall Street Journal. And meanwhile, this is David Ignatius of the Washington Post. This is a great one. He says this, and he's a columnist very close to intelligence officials, speaks to them often. He says this: Meanwhile, for the U.S. and its NATO allies, these 18 months of war have been a strategic windfall at relatively low cost. And then in parentheses, he says, other than for the Ukrainians. So that's how much contempt we have for Ukraine and how little we care for them, that now their sacrifice, their cost gets relegated to parentheses. and we're celebrating what a great thing this has been for us. When I thought this was all about defending Ukraine, now their sacrifice is parenthetical, and the fact that they have to suffer all these casualties, have their country destroyed, it's not even that big a deal.
It's great for everyone except Ukrainians.
Except Ukrainians, yeah.
Who are just incidental, obviously.
Let's keep going with Anthony Blinken.
These minefields, then trenches, then Russian artillery. One of the reasons that it's proving so difficult is that they have no air power. If the U.S. Army were to do this, the United States would have massive air power, lots of bombing, clear the way, make it possible for the troops to then move forward. Why not give the Ukrainians the F-16s that they are asking for? Because that will make this counteroffensive much more effective.
Fried, at every step along the way, in fact, going back before the Russian aggression, when we saw the storm rising, and we made sure going back to Labor Day before the war, Christmas before the war, that they started to get in their hands the equipment they would need if the Russians went forward. Javelins, Stingers. They had that on hand. They were able to repel the attack against Kyiv. They were able to save their country from being taken entirely by Russia. Every step along the way ever since, we've worked to try to get them what they need when they need it. But it's not just the equipment itself. It's the training. It's the maintenance. It's the ability to use it in combined arms operations. All of that takes time. If a decision were made to actually move forward on the F-16s tomorrow, it would be months and months before they were actually operational.
But then why not make the decision so that they can get them?
So this is what we're working on now, because as I said, it's not enough to give them F-16s. They've got to be trained. The training program.
What I think is really going on here is, this is just my speculation. I think the Biden administration is worried about F-16s being shot down by Russian air defenses, because Russia apparently has good air defenses. And these F-16s, apparently, it would be a bad look for the U.S. if these F-16s were easily shot down. So that's what I suspect is the delay here, because, I mean, everyone knows that the U.S. would never, and this is now also being admitted, the U.S. would never launch a counteroffensive under the conditions that it's forcing Ukraine to do so, because to go after a fortified enemy, you need air power to take out their entrenched positions, which Russia has. And so Ukraine has no air power, or doesn't have air dominance at all. And so they do need F-16s. And why would the Biden administration not want to give it to them? My speculation is that they're just worried that they'll get knocked down and it'll make the U.S. look bad. It would be embarrassing. Maybe there's another theory that I'm not aware of, but that seems to be the case to me, because, of course, every weapon system that the Biden administration, or almost every weapon system that the Biden administration has previously said they wouldn't send, they end up sending anyway. So we'll see if this is if this follows that trend.
Is moving forward with a number of countries. All of that's happening. But I'm not a military expert. I think you've heard Chairman Milley, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, speak to this. We believe that
Milley, does he want to cite everything Milley says? Like neither side can win the war?
He's not citing that one. Yes, we're all supposed to forget, this never gets asked about, that Milley called for negotiations last November. He said that, like, Ukraine's gone as far as it can. They should sit down and talk. And Blinken worked behind the scenes to undermine that. And so, yeah, that doesn't get cited or discussed anymore. And that's the nation's top military official who said that.
Who's useful enough to cite in other contexts, but somehow not in this context.
Not for this one, no.
What they have and what they've been trained on is what they need to be effective, including dealing with the Russian mines. But it is hard going.
But they feel differently. When I talk to Ukrainians, they say, there's a pattern here. Every time we ask for something, we're first told, you can't have it, you're not yet ready for it, you don't have the training for it. And then from HIMARS through cluster bombs, eventually we get it, but we get it late, and why not have given it to us earlier if you're trying to make a difference on the battlefield?
So if I were in the shoes of our Ukrainian friends and partners, I'd probably be saying exactly the same thing. And President Zelensky's been extraordinary as a leader and in trying to galvanize the international community along with us to provide them what they need. But the other thing is this. There are 50 some odd countries in this coalition in support of Ukraine. Lloyd Austin's been leading this process on the military side. And different countries do different things at different times, and it all complements each other. So,
it's a mixed bag.
Such a bullshit response.
It's such bullshit because, of course, to give F-16s, the U.S. has to authorize it because that's a U.S. production. So for anyone to transfer F-16s to Ukraine, that needs the U.S. to authorize it. So saying it's up to other countries is just totally disingenuous.
Right.
And that just underscores how Blinken and his colleagues will sell out Ukraine and lie if it ever suits them. As we saw recently with the NATO summit, where one of the reasons we're supposed to be in this war is to defend Ukraine's theoretical right to join NATO, and then when it comes time to the summit to give Ukraine some kind of forget admitting them now, fine, that's not going to happen, but even some kind of roadmap
later
as to
on
what you can do to join, they wouldn't even give them that. They totally threw them under the bus, and this is Blinken doing that again.
German writes, different countries do different things. Wow, I could be the fucking Secretary of State. It's true. We could all be.
for example, we have certain munitions that we provided to the Ukrainians, including the HIMARS. Other countries have provided some munitions that have a longer range because as the Russians move back their command and control, as they move back some of their supply depots, out of range in some cases of what we've given them, the munitions that other countries are providing as part of an organized coalition are allowing the Ukrainians to hit them. They've had some significant success. So our military leaders are using their best expertise possible to help determine what it is that can be most effective for the Ukrainians, how quickly can it be deployed, how effectively can they use it. That will continue, and the process on the F-16s is moving.
Which means they will get F-16s.
Well, look, I believe that that they will, and
By the way, really aggressive questioning by Fareed Zakaria.
Really wants those F-16s.
We've pointed this out from the start that the only way you can ask an adversarial question of a U.S. official in this Ukraine proxy war is when you're berating them for not being hawkish enough. Right. When are they going to get more weapons? That's how you can ask a challenging question to Antony Blinken is, when are you going to give Ukraine more weapon systems that you haven't already given? That's the only challenging question you can ask. Basically.
Can you imagine any journalist being like, why are you doing this instead of pursuing diplomacy?
It never happens. It never happens.
Even though that's actually what you'd think you would ask a diplomat.
Yeah.
Which is what this guy is supposed to be.
And, recently Putin held up a document in front of a group of African leaders and said, hey, this was the piece of deal that we signed with Ukraine back in April. It even has the signature of the lead Ukrainian negotiator, and the U.S. sabotaged this agreement. And we've talked about that before. That's when Boris Johnson came over and told Zelensky that the U.S. and UK wouldn't back him up if he reached a peace deal in April of 2022. So just a few months into the war. And no one ever asked Blinken about that. Hey, was there a peace deal and did you guys block it? And, given that there was a peace deal before, is there not a possibility of reaching one again? That's just vetoed from history, not allowed to acknowledge it.
Right. Because our media is actually more belligerent than even our military.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure.
The important focus is on making sure that when they do, they're properly trained, they're able to maintain the planes and use them in a smart way.
Do you think it could be part of the Russian strategy to try to wait for the election of 2024, hope that Donald Trump comes into the White House and they can cut a deal with him?
Well, again, everything we put in motion and that many other countries are taking a lead role in, that will happen.
Isn't that a weird question? Do you think it's part of the Russian strategy to wait until they can reach a deal? And if that were the case, why not try to maybe reach a deal now? And especially if you think Trump would betray Ukraine.
That's a really good point, Aaron.
Why not at least see if you can reach something now? But it's, again, for these people, it's not even an option. There's no, there's a refusal to acknowledge Russia as any kind of equal party at all and to address their concerns. For example, NATO expansion, the placement of offensive weaponry in NATO states around Russia, which was, the issue of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russia feels as if it's threatened by NATO weapons, especially U.S. weapons in Poland and Romania, and also possibly Ukraine too. So those issues could be at least discussed and see if there's something that could be done. But there's no discussions at all to be had. Okay, we can move on from Tony Blinken. Always good
Guys,
to see
listen to
him.
Susan. Smash that like button. Good vibes.
Well, our current political spectrum doesn't offer us much in the way of choices. So we have the Biden administration on one hand, then we have on the other side, the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. And what does he have to say about ending the war in Ukraine?
Another gem from his talk with Maria Bartiromo.
Money to Ukraine at this point?
I get the war settled. The money is.
Wait, hold on. We have to start with this one from the beginning.
Would you stop the money to Ukraine at this point?
I get the war settled. The money is. Number one, I tell Europe, you're about $100 billion plus short. Okay, you got to pay, because Europe is smiling all the way to the bank. We're giving all of this. Europe is doing very little compared to the United States, and it affects them more. Look, no matter how you look at it, they're right there. We're an ocean apart. Why are we at 150 billion and they're at 20? They have to, and their economies almost exactly our size if you add it all up. You add up the countries of Europe, and we have a very similar economy they have a very similar to the United States.
So look at the chyron there. It says, Trump, Europe needs to contribute more to defense. And that basically is Trump's only substantive policy when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Yeah. He talks about that he'll end the war in 24 hours.
He has a 24-hour war ending period. Yeah.
Yeah. He claims that. But his only strategy so far is he laid it out last week. He said that I'll tell Zelensky no more, but I'll tell Putin, unless you end the war, we're going to give Ukraine more weapons. Yeah. So it's like he's trying to play Putin and Zelensky against each other when they're already against each other.
But he said it out loud.
He said it out loud.
Yeah.
He's already undermined his own strategy. So great job there. But then he says, basically, his other thing is Europe needs to spend more on the military. Right. And what is that? That's a very actually pro-NATO position. It's not like his critics constantly say he wants to undermine NATO. No, he wants NATO to spend more money on weapons, to transfer more money to the military-industrial complex. That's his only big policy. So he likes to claim he'll bring peace. His supporters, some of them like to think he'll bring peace. But when he actually talks, he's just as, or I shouldn't say it's just as much, he's hawkish in ways that no one wants to acknowledge, because Democrats want to portray him as a Putin stooge still. And some of his fans want to portray him as a peace man. But really, he just wants more money spent on the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. They should be at the same number that we're at, if not more. And they get away with murder. And they did with NATO, too. You know what I did with NATO? They weren't paying, and I made them pay.
Right.
And took in hundreds of billions of dollars. I said, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you.
Would you be...
So there we go.
There it
That's
is.
the Trump plan.
Pay for play. Yeah. Pay for protection.
Okay, well, because one world-threatening conflict is not enough, let's switch over to Asia and see what the U.S. is up to in South Korea.
Going back to early in this administration, that we were prepared to have negotiations with North Korea on the nuclear program with no preconditions. Here's the response we got. One missile launch after another. The response that North Korea has elicited with these repeated provocations has only been to solidify the work that the United States, Korea, and Japan are doing together to make sure we can defend ourselves.
That was Secretary of State Antony Blinken referring to the massive nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarine that rolled into port this week in South Korea. We were right there aboard that docked submarine this week. Its presence meant to reassure allies and send a strong message of deterrence to North Korea.
They are the most destructive warships in the world, and the
whale.
U.S. has more than a dozen in its arsenal, secretly, silently spanning the globe. But this week, a very public display of power, the USS Kentucky, docked in the southern port of Busan, the first nuclear-armed submarine to enter these South Korean waters in 4 decades.
What a milestone. Wow. That's so great. The first nuclear submarine to enter South Korea in 4 decades. Great job, Joe Biden.
They're on the up.
Yeah. Speaking of birthdays, we'll need to have a birthday for this one.
Mm-hmm.
What a great day to
Which
celebrate.
shares a birthday with me, yeah. Birthday month with me, yeah.
The Navy will not say officially that there are nuclear weapons on board this submarine, but make no mistake, I am standing on top of hundreds of nuclear warheads. The ship's commanding officer takes us below deck, where you can see the orange missile tubes lining the ship, 20 of them with ballistic missiles, each one armed with more than a dozen nuclear warheads. The Kentucky conducts routine training as well as test launches like this one from the submarine to make certain they are always prepared. What's that like?
It's very, very sobering. You know, we do these training simulations all the time, but nothing can really replicate the feel that happens when an 100,000 pounds of D5 missile leaves the submarine.
It is
Oh yeah.
Nothing.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
nothing like it. Let me tell you.
What a rush. What a rush. Is there anything else these guys can do to, satisfy their need for a thrill, for a nuclear thrill, like play video games, go skydiving? I mean, is testing a nuclear bomb or testing a ballistic missile, whatever it is they're testing, is that really what they need to be doing? And like, why is this a good thing that we have nuclear weapons going around the world? I mean, it's funny that
that's why we have to give them the opportunity also to have those war games with China. Remember how into it they were?
Oh yeah, the Congress people.
Yeah,
oh,
they like that too.
Yeah.
deterrence that is the focus of this submarine's visit, letting North Korea know just what would happen if they launched a weapon. Rear Admiral Chris Kavanaugh is commander of Submarine Group 7.
Ballistic missile submarines like this deter exactly that type of conflict.
Are you worried about the possibility it could backfire?
I am very confident in our own nuclear deterrence.
But this week's show of force was complicated by an unexpected and disturbing incident. That American soldier, Travis King, who bolted into North Korea at the demilitarized zone that divides the North and South. He was then taken away in a van by North Korean military. The Army private had just been released after serving 47 days in a South Korean jail on assault charges and was supposed to be on a flight back to the U.S. to face discharge from the Army. While officials acknowledge attempts to establish communication with North Korea remain unanswered, retired U.S. General Robert Abrams, who led U.S. forces in Korea until 2021, says this could be a long process.
I'm fairly confident that North Korea is going to take their time. They're going to consider every possible angle on how they will, deal with this Travis King problem that they have, that we have, and how they will proceed.
The Biden administration saying King's well-being is a top concern, including, says Secretary Blinken, the possibility he could be tortured.
There are certainly concerns based on what we've seen in the past and the way that North Korea has treated those it's detained.
Well, good thing he isn't at Gitmo when he would definitely,
certainly be right.
There'd be no doubt. But yeah, look, not an issue I'm super familiar with, but I do know that there was attempts at talks between North Korea and the U.S. I mean, going back decades, it's a long story, but I know the Bush administration really sabotaged things. And then Obama kind of like punted. He kind of flirted with talks, but then ended up saying, whatever, like I'll leave it to the next guy. And then Trump actually got somewhere with North Korea. He actually came close, as far as I know, and then basically got sabotaged by John Bolton and Mike Pompeo stepped in to make sure that nothing could happen. And now Biden's pretty much continuing, I think, the Trump policy of the John Bolton, Mike Pompeo policy of no meaningful talks. And so the next option, I guess, for them is to go send nuclear weapons to South Korea. So how could that go wrong?
Step. It's the next logical step.
Yeah.
It's diplomacy 101.
Absolutely. Well, someone who's thrilled with that, of course, is House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCall, Supreme warmonger. Yeah, he's very happy with this. So let's hear what he has to say.
This comes at a time, as we were just saying, as that nuclear ballistic submarine was in dock there in South Korea, which I saw. Is that a good idea? And why now?
Yes,
I think it is. And
Yes.
We
Spoiler
were with Admiral Aquilino, Indo-PACOM commander. I think projecting strength right now is important for deterrence. As you note, it's the first time in 4 decades we've had this deployment of submarines, and I think it's a projection of strength that we need right now to deter aggression. We're seeing a very aggressive, not only North Korea and the rockets they fired in the Sea of Japan, but also the aggression we see from China. When I just came back from Taiwan, they encircled the island with 10 battleships and armada, 70 fighter jets to threaten and intimidate us. And then I was sanctioned just to illustrate how aggressive their posture is now.
So because China deployed its military around Taiwan when Michael McCall was there, that means we have to send a nuclear submarine to South Korea.
Yeah.
I don't follow the logic, but hey.
Aaron, whenever you have a question, whenever you want to ask someone a question about if something is worth it, the answer is yes, because China.
Yes, absolutely.
If any military ratcheting up is worth it, yes, China.
It's true. I mean, when people question the proxy war in Ukraine, people like Michael McCall, Chris Christie, or whoever else will say, don't forget, we also have to send a message to China. This isn't just about Russia. There's China too, which for some reason means we have to sacrifice more Ukrainians.
Right. It's a proxy war squared.
Proxy war squared, exactly.
Yeah. By the way, people keep asking, I'm going to say it again because I don't want people distracted. I have allergies right now, bad eye allergies. Don't want them on film, so I'm wearing these sunglasses.
Yeah, it's a cool new look. I don't
cool look. It is a cool look. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're welcome, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can probably hear my allergies a little bit too. Apologies for that.
I with a little more prep, I would have done it in solidarity with you, Katie.
Oh yeah.
I should have asked handy.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They are crooked. Someone said they're crooked on face. They are crooked. They are crooked sunglasses.
All right. Well, that's
luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of like that's a pretty pointed criticism. I mean, sunglasses aren't perfectly framed all the time.
No. It could have been my face too. You could have discovered that it was my actual face being asymmetrical. But what I'll do is I'll wear another pair of glasses and you'll see it's not.
Sounds good. Okay.
How are we in the likes? I think this is what happens when I don't keep you guys in line. Where are we in likes, Wilson? We got 1,889 people watching and how many likes?
744.
It's not like tragic, but we really need to be halfway there. So let's get to 900.
Birthday month of all
times. My birthday month, yeah.
Maybe that's why the Chuckster left, because he was disappointed.
Probably. All right.
Okay. Turning to the domestic front, we had this week, as mentioned before, this hearing of 2 agents with the IRS. One of them is a Democrat, and they allege that Hunter Biden got preferential treatment, that there was a case there that should have been brought, and he got off on a sweetheart plea deal. Nancy Pelosi, though, is here to tell us why there's nothing to see here. This is all just malarkey on behalf of the Republicans. Shocker that Nancy Pelosi would think that.
That the politics did not play a role here.
Well, it was since you reference the hearing, what a ridiculous clown show again on the part of the Republicans. Here was a purpose that you described. What did they do? Bring in Joe Kennedy talking about censorship, that he's being censored as he's talking to the world in a...
That must have been really censored because I didn't hear Joe Kennedy speaking in front of Congress. She obviously means RFK, but it's kind of funny.
Congressional hearing and showing pictures that had nothing to do with the essence of it.
I think you mentioned Robert F. Kennedy, but on the essence of it,
sorry, just
it's okay. There are a lot of Kennedys. Do you feel confident? No politics.
So, and when she talks about pictures there, she's referring to Marjorie Taylor Greene showing lewd photos of Hunter Biden taken from his laptop of him engaging in sex acts with sex workers. And Democrats didn't appreciate that. But it did make for some colorful...
It was good.
Yeah, it was some good theater.
I think we showed it. May have been, was it Thursday Throwdown that we showed it on? I think so.
We did cover it. Yes. Marjorie Taylor Greene, at the end of her time, like having like a picture of Hunter Biden, it was blurred, I think. So
yeah,
I think
it was curved. We covered it. They covered it. Luckily. Yeah.
So anyway, Nancy Pelosi is not happy with that.
Well, the U.S. attorney was a Trump appointee. Now, I have respect for whistleblowers, but the fact is that from the basis of that hearing, they didn't even have a fair shot at what they came to say in light of the clown show that was going on with pictures and Robert Kennedy with his ridiculous presentation.
Okay, this is really confusing. She's saying that these IRS whistleblowers, that theirs was a clown show because of what RFK Jr. was saying at a totally separate hearing. I think the following day, I'm pretty sure, or regardless, I don't remember the timing, but the point is that was a totally separate hearing that had nothing to do with them. So how does what RFK was saying, whatever you think of it, how does that?
He tainted the entire Congress.
Yeah, right. He tainted these. Yeah, that's what she's saying.
Yeah,
that's what she's saying. And I'm pretty sure that his hearing was even afterwards. But regardless, I don't see what one has to do with the other. It was different committees, different topics. RFK was talking about censorship of dissenting voices. These guys are talking about political interference in an IRS case that had to do with the president's son. And then she's saying also that they're tainted by Marjorie Taylor Greene showing naked pictures of Hunter Biden. But again, whether or not Marjorie Taylor Greene was appropriate in doing that, and I think you can make a case like she's showing these pictures because Hunter Biden paid for these sex workers illicitly, right? As people do if they're hiring sex workers, and that had to do with his bank accounts. And so I do think it was germane to the hearing. But regardless, even if you disagree with that, either their assertions and allegations have merit or they don't, and that's not what is being addressed.
Yeah. What's such a talking point she was so committed to? This clown show.
Yeah, it was a clown show. Yeah. Okay, well, speaking of clown show, we have more from Nancy Pelosi, who is not happy that Americans aren't sufficiently appreciating what a great economy they live in under Joe Biden.
This week found a Quinnipiac poll this week found nearly 6 in 10 Americans still disapprove of his handling of the economy. Why is that, and what does he have to do to turn that around?
Well, a lot of it's about messaging, of course. I'm so proud of this president. In the 2 years that we were in the majority working with him, he broke all records on the level with a Lyndon Johnson or a Franklin Roosevelt in terms of the caliber of legislation that he passed for the good of the people, lowering prescription drugs, again, cutting in half, as you indicate, cutting in half unemployment.
So why isn't the American public giving him credit?
The prescription drugs legislation was positive, right? But remember, it came with caveats. It only covered a small category of prescription drugs, and its provisions, if I recall correctly, won't take effect until years from now.
Many of them, yeah.
Right? And of course, Republicans are ghouls on that issue and did everything they could to keep prescription drugs unaffordable, including insulin. But again, to say that Biden had this big accomplishment when even the measure he passed was watered down, I think that's an exaggeration. And comparing it to Roosevelt and LBJ, who instituted actual social programs that lifted people out of poverty,
increased the welfare, the social safety net, the welfare state. Yeah,
I don't think you can say that Biden is comparable to them.
By the way, Democrats love talking about messaging, but never about actual policy or content. So it's all about tweaking. So if there's a disconnect with the people, it's because we're not doing effective messaging. It's not about what we're actually providing them with. And Shay writes, it's all about messaging. If you're homeless, you just aren't getting the message.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Million jobs. There has to be messaged. It is a legitimate question. I ask myself all the time, too.
Yeah, you're doing a really good job on that.
The answer she will not come to is we actually haven't delivered very much.
Right.
and while she's a multimillionaire.
You think she asked herself that before she appeared, like with her, you know, exorbitantly priced refrigerator and all her chocolate ice creams? Was she testing?
Definitely
Did she do a messaging test before?
She did.
Maybe
not
she tested on her husband, and he was like, "Looks good to me, Nance."
There definitely was no message test there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Sick.
Who is next?
We got a Psaki bomb from Jennifer Psaki.
All right. All right.
Republicans seem to have a new favorite Democrat, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And his long shot presidential run against Joe Biden have become.
I got to say, Scam-A-Lot's a pretty good.
It is a good one, yeah.
Chiron there. That's good. Scam-A-Lot.
That's good, yeah.
Respect.
Something of a fixation in right-wing circles, bit of an obsession. Leading Republican candidate Donald Trump has openly praised him. Fox News has dedicated a considerable amount of airtime to him, raving over it, everything from his workout routine to his family name, yes, Fox and the Kennedy name, and how he is, quote, polling so well against Joe Biden, even though, just as a side note, he is around 50 points behind, and that gap is apparently widening as people get to know more about him. But Fox has published more than 80 articles and videos about Kennedy since he launched his campaign.
Note how she said it's apparently widening. The gap is apparently widening.
Yeah.
I think that's some sneaky language to make up for the fact that it's not
Maybe
actually
not.
widening. You know, because if it was really widening, you would need the word apparently. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but
No, it's pretty good wiggle room. You just
yeah.
have to say apparently, and then someone can say, no, it's not. You're like, oh, well, apparently it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, totally Fox News will take advantage of any challenger to Biden who is polling well. But the fact is, relatively early on in the primary, he already is polling well. He is a Kennedy. He does say things that resonate, at least with Republican voters, including, you know, criticizing vaccine mandates and also the proxy war in Ukraine. And so I do think there's a legit news reason to cover him, and not just because he's an opponent to Joe Biden. And the part that bothers me here that Democrats
It's both, I would say, but yeah.
Yeah, like the part that bothers me is like in all this criticism of RFK, they never go after him for what I think is his, without a doubt, his worst position, which is his stance on Israel, which is like to the right of Joe Biden.
Right.
He's like, whenever he gets accused of anti-Semitism, he counters by saying, I'll pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, and I love Israel.
Right.
And so
embarrassing. But they don't care about that, of course.
They don't care
these
about that.
Republicans.
No.
They like that.
Yeah. So Fox News agrees with them on that, and so does MSNBC, basically. And they'll never criticize him for that. So that's, you know, that's my problem with him. But it doesn't even get a mention here.
Campaign in April. And just to put that in perspective, that kind of expansive coverage is usually reserved over there for woke Mickey Mouse, communist Barbie, and other topics along those lines. And more coverage seems to be coming. Sean Hannity is going to host a town hall with RFK Jr. this week. Even Republican lawmakers love this guy.
All right, so we get the message. RFK Jr. is being boosted by Fox News. Now, compare that to when Donald Trump ran in 2015, 2016. It was Hillary and Bill who encouraged him to run. And then when he did run, MSNBC would cover his empty podium. That's how much airtime they gave him. So there is a history here of networks covering extensively the other party's, you know, renegade candidate. And I'm just saying MSNBC isn't one to throw stones here.
Right. And as Aaron loves to point out, the conspiracy theories that they push. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, they will go on to mock RFK Jr. and call him a conspiracy theorist, but they never take account for their own conspiracy theories, which were, I think, the dumbest conspiracy theories of all time, that Trump and his campaign were assets of the Russian government and conspired with them in a sprawling conspiracy. They never talk about that. Okay, let's move on to Chris Christie, shall we?
Yeah. Talking to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation.
Yeah. And Margaret Brennan wants the Republicans to move on from Hunter Biden. And Chris Christie says no.
Not on my watch.
So many legal issues in this campaign. And I want to ask you about one involving the president's son, Hunter Biden, who's going to appear in court this week to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and will enter into an agreement that could avert conviction on a gun-related charge. The deal has infuriated many congressional Republicans who are holding their own hearings. And I wonder, after this plea happens, if you would advise your party to move on.
No, I wouldn't, Margaret, and here's why.
Do you think she expected him to say yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so too, because I think she's used to this guy kind of agreeing with them so much, because a lot of the things that he does is to talk about how bad Trump is, even though he would have been happy to work for Trump. So I think that they maybe expected this to turn out differently, but
the conduct here by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware and by the Justice Department, it just can't be justified. It doesn't take 5 years, Margaret. As you mentioned, I was the U.S. Attorney in the 5th largest office in the country for 7 years during the Bush administration. It does not take 5 years to investigate 2 misdemeanor tax counts and to dismiss a gun charge. And we need to know what they were investigating and why these are the charges they concluded to. This is not just any person. This is the son of the President of the United States. And while justice needs to be equal, it needs to be equal. And it doesn't appear to me that this is the way to do it. And I would say one thing on the gun charge. I mean, this is a case where Democrats yell and scream for more new gun laws in the country, yet you hear no Democrat yelling about the fact that Hunter Biden intentionally lied on his gun permit application, mishandled the gun after he received it with a false permit application, and faces absolutely no penalty. Guess what? The guy who sponsored that law was his father, Senator Joe Biden, and that charge carries a 10-year sentence, Margaret. We need to explain, they need to explain to the public why that was done. So no, I don't think it's time to move on.
And you know that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware was appointed by former President Trump. On issues...
Incompetent, Margaret. It doesn't matter whether, you're appointed by a Republican or a Democrat. If your work appears to be incompetent and inexplicable, you need to explain it so we can have confidence in our justice system. And I don't care whether Mr. Weiss is a Republican or a Democrat. He owes the American people an explanation.
Chris Christie. I mean, it's a good answer.
He's good on that, yeah.
That is the stock response in this Hunter Biden tax thing, which is like they'll say, "Oh, well, the prosecutor was appointed by Trump."
Right.
Okay, but if these 2 whistleblowers are saying that there was political interference by people even above this prosecutor, and that this was done leniently, then that should be at least listened to. They should get a hearing.
Right.
But because, of course, this is Joe Biden and he's the establishment's preferred candidate, they just want us to move on. I mean, ultimately, it's not this kind of corruption happens pretty often. It's not like this earth-shattering thing, but it's at least worthy of some attention.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's the hypocrisy angle that's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these whistleblowers, I mean, from what I saw at the hearing, they seem pretty credible to me. But anyway, okay. Next up, what do we got?
We got some immigration talk. Now we're going to hear from, remember, prolific pro-lifer, as he introduces himself, Rep. Tony Gonzalez. So let's hear what he has to say to Margaret Brennan about some pretty horrific news happening.
Says that in 1 week alone, agents reported dozens of migrants with injuries, including those broken limbs you referenced, and drownings, including several children under the age of 1. Should those buoys be removed now?
I don't think the buoys are the problem. Honestly, Margaret, this has been happening every single week. We've seen people drown. Last year, there were hundreds of migrants that are drowning. I'm glad it's getting some attention. I'd much rather see the attention get focused on something else. The reality is the buoy is only a very small little portion of the river. So it continues to have these other obstacles. I am concerned, though, that, I've seen reports that that DPS troopers, over a dozen, have filed complaints about what is happening.
So this is a kind of important story, which is that the Justice Department, as well as the government of Mexico, both of them are suing Texas for these buoys and these the really scary barbed wire barriers that they're setting up to try to make it lethal to come into this country. this is something, Bill Clinton did and was applauded from. Basically, it basically increases the number of people who are going to die in order to try to lower migration. And so this guy is pretty shitty on immigration. And so he's kind of saying, like, stop making such a big deal about these buoys and barbed wire blockages, NBD. He wishes something else was getting more attention.
Yeah.
It's only a small number.
People are dying every week, but meh.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you have these people who are actually there is an email sent out from actual public safety troopers about how dangerous these things were. And apparently a pregnant woman was having a miscarriage. She was caught in the barbed wire in June. A 4-year-old girl passed out from heat exhaustion as she attempted to pass the barrier. That was pushed back by Texas National Guard soldiers. A teen boy broke his leg trying to get around the barbed wire. And it's increased the number of drownings by forcing them into deeper parts of the water.
That is horrible.
It's so horrible. And all these people are doing is trying to survive.
Yeah.
But they would happen to be wrong they happen to be born in the wrong country. Razor wire, right? It's razor wire, not barbed wire. I don't know if those are the same things, but it's razor wire. Yeah. Someone wrote, have they considered not coming illegally and coming legally? I mean, when people are coming somewhere illegally, that means that they are probably fleeing something that's very hard. And I mean, to me, it's like, well, that's a good point. Make the immigration process efficient. They could also do that. But we have a broken immigration system. And it's hard for me to get very upset about people who are trying to like live a better life. And the only thing that they did wrong was be wrong and be born in the wrong country.
Yeah, a country. I mean, if we're concerned about how they're arriving, what we can do is not put Central American countries under murderous sanctions, not destabilize them with proxy wars as the U.S. has done in places like Nicaragua.
Right.
And, provide actual assistance to, help them have self-sustaining economies rather than being economies that are dependent and subservient to U.S. corporations that then end up wiping out farming and all things that keep people alive and force people to flee. That's what we can do, I think.
Right.
That's the top thing we can do. But we're not allowed to discuss that because our policies are never under scrutiny. It's always their fault.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's go to Florida, I guess, where I haven't followed this too closely, but apparently.
Oh yeah, this is a funny. So yeah, we got some interesting curricula changes coming around in Florida, where it turns out slavery # not so bad. Let's take a look at this clip and see what's happening in Florida.
Kamala Harris, as you know, is taking aim at this Florida guideline in terms of new educational standards, a component of which says, and I'm quoting, slaves develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Governor DeSantis, who signed a law requiring changes in how race be taught in schools, said this was all written by scholars. Here's exactly what he said.
I didn't do it, and I wasn't involved in it. But I think what they're doing is I think that they're probably going to show some of the folks that eventually parlayed, being a blacksmith into doing things later in life.
Ouch! I'm sorry to laugh. That is, wow. That is brutal. So people parlayed slavery into something beneficial later in life. Wow. And his defense is, I didn't do it, but hey, they're just pointing out the advantages.
Right. But it's a good argument. I didn't do it, but some scholars put that in there.
Wow. Okay.
Can you imagine being like, some people parlayed the things that they learned in Auschwitz?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, that would never happen.
Later on in life.
That would never happen. No.
So let's hear what
you think of this controversy and how it reflects on your party.
Well, I think two.
So, okay, this is his big chance now to talk about the fact that his party is pushing curricula that emphasize the teachable moments that come through slavery and skills. Okay, here's his big opportunity.
Things, Margaret. First of all, I didn't do it and I'm not involved in it are not the words of leadership. Look, Governor DeSantis started this fire with the bill that he signed, and now he doesn't want to take responsibility for whatever is done in the aftermath of it. And from listening and watching his comments, he's obviously uncomfortable. The second part of this is why one of the reasons I'm running, Margaret. We're arguing about these issues, these smaller issues, when we've got big issues in our country like runaway inflation that continues to hurt families, like an educational system. Instead of worrying about this, let's talk about the falling test scores throughout this country that are making us less competitive with the rest of the world. We have enormous issues to deal with in this country and around the world, and we're spending time, and I don't blame you for asking, but we're spending time on this as the first question to a presidential candidate on a Sunday morning. The fact is that Governor DeSantis starts these things for.
Chris Christie demands questions that are commensurate to his level of excellence. So the first question you're asking me on a Sunday morning is about Ron DeSantis and his silly comments. This is beneath Chris Christie. That's what he's basically saying there.
Right.
This is ridiculous. He's mad at Ron DeSantis that he's even in this position to be asked about Ron DeSantis.
Right. He's pretty. I mean, let's just hear the rest of the
for political advantage. He tries to take political advantage of them, and then he says, "I don't know. I didn't do it. I wasn't involved." I mean, that's not leadership, Margaret.
It's pretty clever way of him not having to actually respond to the content of the controversy.
Yeah.
And just call Chris Christie out for being not an effective leader. I mean, sorry, call DeSantis out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris Christie is an effective pundit. He's had a lot of experience at it, and he's putting it to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the campaign trail. So good for him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, I think that was good. Good. We brought in a lot of important moments from this weekend, and even though we didn't have Chuck Todd, so that's
we were down.
Pretty impressive.
We were down. We had a handicap, but we prevailed. So thanks everybody for tuning in. usefulidiots.substack.com or usefulidiots.locals.com to get bonus content and support the show. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.